Hey everyone, this is part 2, or the second video, of chapter 2 of Matthias Küntzel's Nazis, Islamic Antisemitism in the Middle East, the 1948 Arab War against Israel, and the Aftershocks of World War II. Chapter 2 is titled 1937, The Watershed, and it starts with a section called, quote, Islam and Judaism, end quote. The text, first published in Arabic on the 18th of August 1937 in Cairo, is the first full presentation of the construct of a direct connection between Muhammad's clashes with the Jews in Medina and the contemporary conflict in Palestine, and of a link between the 7th and 20th centuries. Quote, a distinguished Arab, bracket, probably a reference to al-Husseini, and bracket, wrote this book about the profound hostility of the Jews to Islam and their actions against Allah's prophet, end quote, says the foreword. The very next sentence links the prophet with the present day. Quote, the Palestinian Arab Information Office in Egypt is publishing this investigation because it is important for Muslims and Arabs to be clear about the Jews. This is of special importance in these days in which they are obtaining a state in Palestine and wish with the help of the British to drive out the Muslims and Arabs, end quote. Footnote. I am grateful to the Israeli historian Dr. Eddie Cohen, who discovered an Arabic original of the first edition, for making the text available to me and translating the foreword. End footnote. Since his appointment as Mufti of Jerusalem in 1921, the aim of al-Husseini's policy had been to turn the limited territorial conflict in Palestine into an unlimited religious life-or-death war. From 1922 to 1936, al-Husseini concentrated his campaigning on the alleged threat to the Islamic holy places, with the aim of mobilizing the religious peasantry, who were little impressed by nationalist slogans, and focusing the attention of the world's Muslims on Jerusalem. Al-Husseini elevated the Temple Mount into the symbol of the anti-Zionist struggle and declared defense of the Al-Aqsa Mosque a religious duty. Footnote. See Yehoshua Poratz, The Emergence of the Palestinian Arab National Movement, 1918 to 1929. Already looked that up. Moving on. In early summer 1936, al-Husseini sent agents to Europe to win support for his cause there. Quote, the core of their argument consisted, as before, in the alleged intention of the Jews to destroy the Islamic holy places, unquote. Footnote. See Gudrun Kramer, Minderheit Millet Nation, question mark, Die Juden in Ägypten, 1914 to 1952. End footnote. The publication of Islam and Judaism in summer 1937 marks the beginning of the second stage of the process of turning the territorial conflict in Palestine into a religious war. What made it different from the previous efforts? In the first place, the subject is no longer the Jews in Palestine, but global Jewry as a closed collective with immutable characteristics. Its hostility to Islam is depicted as, quote, age-old and rooted in Jewish souls since the advent of Muhammad, end quote. This, quote, eternal hatred, end quote, is not confined to the Palestinian conflict. Quote, whoever believes that if the Palestine problem is solved, or if the Jews are defeated in this conflict, everything will be fine, are wrong, end quote, states the Arabic original. Quote, even then, nothing will change as regards their hostility to Islam and the Arabs. Allah will therefore see to it that the Jews are humiliated and their backbone broken, end quote. Secondly, here, the Quran and Muhammad's complex biography are reduced to a single theme, the alleged enmity of the Jews. In order to demonstrate the, quote, eternal nature of the Jews' malicious character, over a dozen incidents from Medina are recounted. Their alleged attempts to kill the Prophet or lure the faithful into error are treated not as time and place-bound episodes, but as proof of the need to pursue the war against the Jews, allegedly started by Muhammad in the here and now. In this respect, Islam and Judaism is the direct antecedent of Sayyid Qutb's polemic Our Struggle with the Jews, which appeared some 15 years later. A third new medium for this anti-Semitism was created, a type of pamphlet that uses simple words to promote a form of Jew hatred based on religion and integrating aspects of European anti-Semitism. Some individual Muslim leaders, such as Abd al-Aziz ibn Saud, who lived from 1875 to 1953, King of Saudi Arabia Rashid Rida, who lived from 1865 to 1935, in parentheses. Who lived from 1865 to 1935, editor of the monthly magazine Al-Manar, and Amin al-Husseini, who lived from 1897 to 1974, himself had already started to espouse Islamic antisemitism before 1937. For Ibn Saud, however, it was something of a, quote, personal idiosyncrasy, end quote, expressed only in private, and for Rashid Rida, it remained confined to articles in his elite magazine, while the Mufti had previously expressed his anti-Semitism only in speeches and at mass rallies. Ibn Saud lived from 1875 to 1953, known in the Western world as Ibn Saud, was the founder and first king of Saudi Arabia, reigning from the 23rd of September 1932 until his death in 1953. Ibn Saud had ruled parts of the kingdom since 1902, having previously been Emir, Sultan, King of Nejd, and King of Hejaz. Ibn Saud was the son of Abdul Rahman bin Faisal, Emir of Nejd, and Sarah bint Ahmed al-Sudairi. The family were exiled from their residence in the city of Riyadh in 1890. Ibn Saud reconquered Riyadh in 1902, starting 3 decades of conquest that made him the ruler of nearly all of Central and North Arabia. Ibn Saud consolidated his control over the Nejd in 1922, then conquered the Hejaz in 1925. Ibn Saud extended his dominions into what later became the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in 1932. Ibn Saud's victory and his support for Islamic revivalists would greatly bolster pan-Islamism across the Islamic world. According to Wahhabi beliefs, Ibn Saud ordered the demolition of several shrines, concording with Wahhabi beliefs. Ibn Saud ordered the demolition of several shrines, the al-Baqi cemetery, and the Jannat al-Mu'alla. As king, Ibn Saud presided over the discovery of petroleum in Saudi Arabia in 1938 and the beginning of large-scale oil production after World War II. Ibn Saud fathered many children, including 45 sons, and all the subsequent kings of Saudi Arabia as of 2025. Back to the text. And Rashid Rida. Sorry, I'm sorry. I know this is probably annoying, or maybe it's not. I don't know. But for me to be looking things up like this, but I think it's necessary for me to even know what I'm talking about. Rashid Rida lived from 1865 to 1935 and was an Islamic scholar, reformer, theologian, and revivalist. An early Salafist, Rashid Rida called for the revival of Hadith studies, and as a theoretician of an Islamic state, condemned the rising currents of secularism and nationalism across the Islamic world following the abolition of the Ottoman Sultanate. Rashid Rida championed a global pan-Islamist program and aimed at re-establishing an Islamic caliphate. As a young Hadith student who studied al-Ghazali and Ibn Taymiyyah, Rida believed reform was necessary to save the Muslim communities, eliminate sophist practices Rashid Rida considered heretical, and initiate an Islamic renewal. Rashid Rida left Syria to work with Abdu in Cairo, Jesus Christ, where Rashid Rida was influenced by Abdu's Islamic modernist movement and began publishing Al-Manar in 1898. Through Al-Manar's popularity across the Islamic world, Rashid Rida became one of the most influential Sunni jurists of his generation, leading the Arab Salafi movement and championing the Arab Salafi movement's cause. Rashid Rida was Abdu's de facto successor and was responsible for a split in Abdu's disciples into one group rooted in modernism and secularism and the other in the revival of Islam. Salafism, also known as Salafiyya, which sought the, quote, Islamization of modernity, end quote, emerged from the latter. During the 1900s, Rashid Rida abandoned his initial rationalist leanings and began espousing Salafi methodologies such as that of al-Hadith. Rashid Rida later supported the Wahhabi movement, revived works by Ibn Taymiyyah, and shifted the Salafism movement into a more conservative and strict scripturalist approach. Rashid Rida is regarded by a number of historians as, quote, pivotal in leading Salafism's retreat, end quote, from the rationalist school of Abdu. Rashid Rida strongly opposed liberalism, Western ideas, Freemasonry, Zionism, and European imperialism, and supported armed jihad to expel European influences from the Islamic world. Rashid Rida also laid the foundations for anti-Western pan-Islamist struggle during the early 20th century. And Rashid Rida's magazine, Al-Manar, or I don't know if I'm saying it right, The Lighthouse, was an Islamic magazine written in Arabic and was founded, published, and edited by Rashid Rida from 1898 until his death in 1935 in Cairo. The magazine championed the superiority of the Islamic religious system over other ideologies, and was noteworthy for its campaigns for the restoration of a pan-Islamic caliphate. Back to the text. The format of a written pamphlet aimed at a wider audience was new. It pioneered the use of a medium that would henceforth be adopted by the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. Moreover, even the timing of the publication, 11 years before the foundation of the State of Israel, is significant. The premise of previous research has been that, quote, Islamistically dressed anti-Semitism, end quote, to use Muhammad Samir Murtaza's expression, begins in the 1950s with Qutb's pamphlet. So, as a result of the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. Wikipedia says, or German Wikipedia, Mohammed Samir Murtaza, born 1981, is a Pakistani-German Islamic and political scientist, Islamic philosopher, and author. Since 2010, Mohammed Samir Murtaza has been the first Muslim to work as an Islamic scholar at the Global Ethic Foundation. Mohammed Samir Murtaza is a reviewer for the Pakistani Islamic journal Hamdard Islamicus and editor of the series Islamic Philosophy. Since 2023, he has been a research fellow at the Jewish Muslim Education Organization, Maimonides. Back to the text. Islam and Judaism, the pamphlet, however, proves that Islamic anti-Semitism as a new form of expression of Jew hatred was being promoted at a time when the flight and expulsion of the Palestinian Arabs (1948) and the Israeli occupation of Gaza and the West Bank (1967) lay many years in the future. The emergence of Islamic anti-Semitism not in the 1950s, but 20 years earlier indicates that, rather than anti-Semitism resulting from the exacerbation of the Middle Eastern conflict, anti-Semitism was it was the other way around. Anti-Semitism exacerbated the conflict. It is true that the Arab Revolt had already taken place in 1936, after the Nazis' Jewish policy had led to a sharp increase in Jewish immigration to Palestine. But the revolt was not provoked by any provocative action by the Jews. In the actual disturbances, we read in the Peel Commission report, quote, "One side put itself, not for the first time, in the wrong by resorting to force, whereas the other side patiently kept the law," end quote. The publication of Islam and Judaism was not inspired by the behavior of Palestinian Jews, but by the fact that summer 1937 saw the first attempt to get agreement on a two-state solution. While the proposal for a partition of Palestine, quote, offers neither party all at once, it offers each what it wants most, namely freedom and security, end quote, states the Peel Commission report. The Mufti and his supporters, however, wanted neither, quote, freedom, end quote, for the Muslims, nor, quote, security, end quote, for the Jews. A new form of Jew hatred was stirring up in order to thwart plans for a peaceful sharing of the territory. This is underlined further by Islam and Judaism's mode of dissemination. The pamphlet, Islam and Judaism's mode of dissemination. New section, the Blaudaun Congress. Wikipedia says the Blaudaun Conference of 1937 was the first pan-Arab summit held in Blaudaun, Syria, on the 8th of September 1937. The second Blaudaun Conference was held 9 years later in 1946. The Blaudaun Conference of 1937 was called by the Arab Higher Committee in response to the Peel Commission, which recommended the partition of Palestine, then under British control, into Arab and Jewish states. The Peel Commission's recommendations were rejected by the participating delegates, while the 1936-39 Arab Revolt in Palestine was ongoing against the British authorities, who supported an increased Jewish immigration to Palestine. The Blaudan Conference held historical significance for being an early display of collective Arab concern regarding the Zionist movement. Back to the text. 3 weeks after the publication of Islam and Judaism, from the 8th to the 10th of September 1937, the first ever Pan-Arab conference took place in the Syrian town of Blaudan, located some 50 kilometers north of Damascus. The Blaudan Congress was attended by 400 participants from Syria, Palestine, Lebanon, Transjordan, Iraq, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia. Among them were such prominent Arab figures as the former Iraqi Prime Minister Naji al-Suwaidi. Current members of Arab governments, however, kept away from this anti-British event. The discussion took place behind closed doors and journalists were excluded. Naji al-Suwaidi, according to Wikipedia, was an Iraqi politician who served as Prime Minister of Iraq from November 1929 to March 1930. Gertrude Bell wrote in May 1921, Naji Suwaidi has drawn up and submitted to me a program for a moderate Sharifian party, which I showed to Sir Piercy (Cox) who thought it all right. I'm very grateful to Naji for keeping me so closely in touch. I've found Naji very sensible and capable, as well as very patient under the prolonged delay. End quote. It's a weird entry. I don't know what the hell that has to do with anything. Naji al-Suwaidi became Prime Minister in November 1929 following the suicide of Abd al-Muhsin as-Sadoun. Naji al-Suwaidi's short time in the post was marked by street protests agitating for a treaty that would pave the way towards Iraqi independence from the British Mandate of Mesopotamia. That turmoil, combined with attacks from hostile newspapers and undermining from both King Faisal I and Nuri as-Said, led him to resign in March 1930. Al-Suwaidi presided over the 1937 Blaudan Conference, one of the first Pan-Arab conferences held in solidarity with Palestinian Arabs against the Zionist movement. He served as Minister of Finance from February 1934 to August 1934, and from March 1940 to February 1941, and April 1941 to May 1941. Naji al-Suwaidi was a member of the rebel government following the 1941 Iraqi coup d'etat. Later taken in custody, he died while being transported from southern Rhodesia to South Africa. He was the brother of Tawfiq al-Suwaidi, also Prime Minister of Iraq. Back to the text. The British Consul General in Damascus, Colonel Gilbert McCareth, nevertheless succeeded in infiltrating an agent. Wikipedia says Sir Gilbert McCareth lived from 1892 to 1962 and was a decorated British Army officer of the First World War who subsequently served as a British diplomat, most notably as ambassador to Colombia from 1947 to 1953. He is described as the, quote, real James Bond, end quote, in a book about other aspects of his career. He began his army service in the ranks in 1914, but after being commissioned in 1916, rapidly rose through the ranks and became a battalion commander. As a subaltern, he was decorated for the rescue of a group of soldiers under heavy fire in 1917. He left the army on the 24th of April 1919 and joined the diplomatic service. Gilbert McCareth held several consular positions in Northern Africa and the Middle East before and during the Second World War. Post-war, Gilbert McCarthy was posted to the newly liberated Dutch East Indies before being posted to Bogota in 1947. In retirement, Gilbert McCarthy lived in Spain, where he died and was buried. Although his grave was saved from disturbance following threats from Spanish authorities in May 2010, in November 2011, Gilbert McCarthy's remains were reburied in a garden of remembrance at the Fusilier Museum in Bury, Greater Manchester. McCarthy is believed to be the first soldier from World War I to be repatriated to England since the burial of the unknown soldier at Westminster Abbey in 1920. Back to the text. In Colonel Gilbert McCarthy's Memorandum Boudan Congress of 14th of September 1937, McCarthy, drawing on his informant's report, defined the gathering as a, quote, manifestation of Judeophobia, end quote. He referred in this respect to a, quote, startlingly inflammatory pamphlet entitled the, quote, the Jews and Islam, ... It had been printed in Egypt, end quote. An appendix to McCarthy's report bears the title, quote, Description of a violently anti-Jewish pamphlet printed in Cairo for the Palestine Defense Committee there, which was given to each of the persons attending the Bloudan Congress, end quote. It explains that, quote, the pamphlet has 31 pages and is entitled, quote, The Jews and Islam, end quote. The information it imparts is stated to have been obtained from the Quran and the, quote, traditions, end quote, end quote. McCarthy. There follows a list of the pamphlet's main points. An account of... Is this a quote? I think this is a quote. An account of the unceasing struggle that has ever gone on between the Jews and the Muslims, and of the hatred always shown by the Jews for Muslims. An account of an attempt of the Jews to assassinate the Prophet Muhammad. All traitors are brothers to the Jews. An account of an attempt of the Jews to poison the Prophet. As a result of this attempt, the Prophet always had bad health. An account of how the Jews seek to engender a spirit of hatred and rivalry among the Muslims. An attempt by the Jews to make the Prophet change his faith. An account of Jews disguising themselves as Muslims for the purpose of bringing doubt to the believers. The rumor spread by the Jews that the Prophet was slain in the Battle of Badr. The Jews send messengers to the Kurdish tribes. The Jews prefer agnosticism to Islam. Quotations from the Prophet's sayings, parenthesis, the unfavorable ones, end parenthesis, about the Jews. The Jews are the servants of Satan, end quote. Colonel Gilbert McCarthy. Quote, this pamphlet, end quote, the report concludes, quote, is said to have been written by the ulema of Palestine and is of a highly inflammatory nature and is tended to stir up, parenthesis, and doubtless will do so, end parenthesis, passions not only against the Jews, but also against the British authorities called the tyrants, end quote. Gilbert McCarthy. There can be no doubt that the text given to the Congress's participants that McCarthy refers to is identical to the Cairo text. Perhaps the latter had even been produced specifically for distribution at Bloudan. In any case, it is certain that the initiator of the conference was Amin al-Husseini, the pamphlet's presumed author. In June 1937, shortly before the bid to arrest him, The Mufti had held talks in Damascus about the holding and organization of the event and assigned people to this task. Footnote. See Yehuda Tagar, the Mufti of Jerusalem and Palestine Arab Politics, 1930 to 1937. I'm not seeing any good descriptions of this piece. Back to the text and footnote. The Mufti had, moreover, quote, put up the money needed to book both the grand hotels in Damascus and Blaudan and provide a large number of penniless participants with free places, end quote, according to a report from the German consul general in Beirut. The Mufti was not able personally to attend, since until October 1937 he remained in hiding. The participants in Blaudan nonetheless appointed al-Husseini honorary president of their gathering. In the following years, Berlin took on the task of distributing Islam and Judaism. The Nazis' efforts to mobilize Arabs against Jews had shown them that Muslims did not understand and rejected their racial anti-Semitism. They therefore laid new stress on promoting an Islam-related variant of Jew hatred. During World War II, the Arabic edition of the pamphlet was disseminated in the Middle East and North Africa, and slightly modified editions in German and Serbo-Croat were also produced and distributed. Archival documents reveal that in 1942, Berlin's Foreign Office sent the German consul in Tangiers 1,500 copies of a, quote, German propaganda text written in Arabic, Islam and the Jews, end quote, for, quote, discreet distribution, end quote. The Spanish authorities in Tangiers, however, took the view that the, quote, distribution of such a pamphlet, which is directed against the Jewish element in Spanish Morocco, cannot be allowed, end quote, and ordered all copies to be seized and destroyed. In 1943, in Zagreb, a further 10,000 copies of a Serbo-Croat translation of Islam and Judaism were printed and distributed in Bosnia and Croatia. Footnote, see David Motadel's Islam and Nazi Germany's War, published in 2014. The description of this book says, in the most crucial phase of the Second World War, German troops fighting in regions as far apart as the Sahara and the Caucasus confronted the Allies across lands largely populated by Muslims. Nazi officials saw Islam as a powerful force with the same enemies as Germany, the British Empire, the Soviet Union, and the Jews. Islam and Nazi Germany's war is the first comprehensive account of Berlin's remarkably ambitious attempts to build an alliance with the Islamic world. Drawing on archival research in 3 continents, David Motadel explains how German officials tried to promote the Third Reich as a patron of Islam. He explores Berlin's policies and propaganda in the Muslim war zones and the extensive work that authorities undertook for the recruitment, spiritual care, and ideological indoctrination of tens of thousands of Muslim volunteers who fought in the Wehrmacht and the SS. Islam and Nazi Germany's war reveals how German troops on the ground in North Africa, the Balkans, and the Eastern Front engaged with diverse Muslim populations, including Muslim Roma and Jewish converts to Islam. Combining measured argument with a masterly handling of detail, It illuminates the profound impact of the Second World War on Muslims around the world and provides a new understanding of the politics of religion in the bloodiest conflict of the 20th century. Back to the text. The historian Jenny Lebel has translated the Croat version into English at Lebel, Mufti 311 to 319. End footnote. In his groundbreaking work, Islam in Nazi Germany's War, David Motadel refers to Islam and Judaism as, quote, one of the most significant examples of this kind of religiously charged anti-Jewish propaganda among Muslims, end quote. While historian Jeffrey Herf has characterized it as, quote, one of the founding texts of the Islamist tradition, one that defined the religion of Islam as a source of hatred of the Jews, end quote. Jeffrey Herf. So who in fact wrote and who in fact originally published Islam and Judaism? Wikipedia says David Motadel is Associate Professor of International History at the London School of Economics. He works on the history of modern Europe and Europe's global entanglements. Back to the text. Footnote. David Motadel für Profit und Führer, die islamische Welt und das Dritte Reich. Published in Stuttgart in 2017. I think this is just the German translation of the book I already looked up. End footnote. Footnote. See Jeffrey Herf, Haj Amin al-Husseini, The Nazis and the Holocaust, The Origins, Nature, and After Effects of Collaboration. Published in Jewish Political Studies Review, 2016. New section. Was it the Mufti? Question mark. The publisher of Islam and Judaism was Muhammad Ali al-Taher, director of the Palestinian Arab Information Office in Cairo. One second. Wikipedia says Muhammad Ali al-Taher lived from 1896 to 1974 and was a Palestinian journalist and newspaper editor. Back to the text. Al-Taher was a prominent journalist from Palestine who lived for a long time in Cairo and was close to the Muslim Brotherhood. Muhammad Ali al-Taher attended the Jerusalem Islamic Conference in 1931 and was one of the better-known participants in the Blaudawn event of 1937, where Muhammad Ali al-Taher joined a propaganda committee established there. The information regarding his relations with Nazi agents is contradictory. On the one hand, his son Hassan al-Taher asserts that while his father was indeed urged to make contact with the Nazis, he refused to do so and never had any such contacts. On the other hand, the British Secret Service considered him to be a, quote, prominent Egyptian under German influence, end quote. Footnote, I am grateful to Hassan al-Taher, who lives in Canada, for providing me with this information in January 2017. And footnote. On the other hand, the French embassy in Cairo also suspected the office headed by al-Taher of cooperating with the Nazis. According to Brynjar Leah, al-Taher was one of al-Husseini's, quote, Palestinian contacts in Cairo, end quote, who organized the transfer of Nazi funds to the Muslim Brotherhood. On the 30th of July, 1942, as Rommel's forces approached Cairo, al-Taher was arrested, according to a report by the American ambassador in Cairo, Alexander Kirk, of the 3rd of October, 1942, referencing Radio Bari, quote, the arrest of ... Mohammed Taher Pasha had been received with a, quote, general feeling of horror, end quote, in Germany, end quote. Wikipedia says Alexander Comstock Kirk lived from 1888 to 1979 and was an American lawyer and diplomat. Wikipedia says Radio Bari, the Radio Bari station, broadcasting from Bari in southern Italy with a power of 200 kilowatts, was commissioned by the Italian National Broadcasting Company, EIAR, in 1932. One of the leading proponents of Radio Bari was Italian Admiral and Senator Angelo Ugo Cons, who served in the Senate of the Kingdom of Italy, together with Guglielmo Marconi, inventor of the radio and Nobel laureate. Admiral Cons, Regia Marina, was a decorated veteran of both the Italo-Turkish War of 1911-1912 and World War I. Admiral Cons was instrumental in the adoption by the Italian Navy, Regia Marina, of Marconi's, quote, wireless telegraph, end quote, for sightless communication between naval ships during the Italo-Turkish War and then during World War I. Marconi was given the rank of commander in the Italian Navy in recognition of his contribution, end parenthesis. For the creation of Arabic programming for the Radio Bari project, Admiral Cons enlisted the assistance of a Lebanese Maronite priest residing in Rome and teaching Arabic at the University of Rome, Monsignor Pietro Seffer. Back to the text. Radio Bari had further reported, quote, that Taher Pasha had in fact been arrested 2 months before at the time of the closing of the Royal Automobile Club in Cairo, of which he was reported to be the president. Bari added that 60 members of the club had been arrested at the same time and thrown into concentration camps, end quote. Radio Bari. But who was this, quote, distinguished, end quote, Arab to whom authorship of Islam and Judaism is attributed? Although this secret was revealed neither in Cairo in August 1937 nor a month later in Blaudan, people in Berlin believed they knew who it was. In 1938, the Berlin-based publishing house Juncker and Dunaupt Verlag published the whole pamphlet under the title Islam Judentum, Aufruf des Großmufti an die Islamische Welt im Jahre 1937, or, in English, Islam Judaism, Appeal of the Grand Mufti to the Islamic World in 1937. And Wikipedia says, German Wikipedia says, Juncker and Dunhaupt was an influential German publishing house during the Weimar Republic and the Nazi era. It was officially founded in Berlin in 1927 by Paul W. Juncker and Rudolf Dunhaupt and existed until after the end of World War II. Back to the text. Presumably in order to avoid causing friction with London, the document was inserted with no mention of either an appeal or an author on the cover in a booklet by Dr. Mohammed Sabri entitled Islam Judentum Bolshevismus. Islam Judentum Bolshevismus. Moreover, in subsequent editions of Islam and Judaism distributed by the Nazis during World War II, the Mufti is named as the author. However, it remains unclear whether al-Husseini was in fact its moving spirit or sole author. What is clear, however, is that the Nazis used the pamphlet attributed to the Mufti for their own propaganda purposes. Did the Nazis contribute to its preparation? On the one hand, the Arabic text displays a poetic style characteristic of other writings by the Mufti. On the other hand, the Mufti never acknowledged authorship. In summer 1937, while the Mufti was in hiding in the mosque quarter of the Temple Mount and had ample opportunity to write Islam and Judaism, al-Husseini was in contact with the German consul general through intermediaries. Footnote, see Fritz Grobe, Männer und Machte im Orient. And Fritz Grobe was a Nazi in Palestine, I believe. Yeah. Not seeing anything for that book, though. Anyway. End footnote. By then, serious attention had already begun to be paid in Germany to Islam's anti-Semitic potential. In April 1935, the Nazi periodical Weltkampf ran a report on the, quote, anti-Semitic movement in Islam, end quote. Subsequently, Johann von Leers, one of a number of prominent Nazi activists who converted to Islam after the war, penned several articles on the theme of, quote, Judaism and Islam as opposites, end quote, in which Johann von Leers quotes Islam and Judaism. Footnote. See Johann von Leers Judentum und Islam als Gegensätze in the book Die Judenfrage in Politik, Recht, Kultur and Wirtschaft, published in 1942. And see the article by Joel Fishman titled The Post-War Career of Nazi Ideologue Johann von Leers, aka Omar Amin, the, quote, first-ranking German, end quote, in Nasser's Egypt, end quote. Let's see if I can find anything on this feller. German Wikipedia says Johann von Leers lived from 1902 to 1965, died in Cairo, with numerous pseudonyms after 1945, was a German Nazi publicist and lawyer. During the Nazi, Johann von Leers was appointed university professor of history. Johann von Leers often worked as a journalist. Throughout Johann von Leers' life, Johann von Leers was one of the most active anti-Semitic propagandists. In 1955, he settled in Egypt, converted to Islam, and continued to spread anti-Semitic propaganda in cooperation with the Egyptian government. Back to the text. Quote, according to his own account, from 1933 onwards, von Leers associated in Berlin with circles of Arab students, some of whom were in contact with al-Husseini. From 1936... God damn it, where am I? Around 1936, von Leers claimed to have made personal contact with the Mufti, end quote. Explains historian Martin Finkenberger, who has conducted an in-depth study of von Leers' career. However, such allusions do not amount to proof that von Leers wrote Islam and Judaism. To this day, we do not know for certain how and why Islam and Judaism came to be conceived and published and what role the Nazis played in the process. The same is true of the German translation. It is more puzzling that Ferdinand Zeiler, the German consul general in Beirut, does not mention the pamphlet in his 4-page report on the Blaudaun Congress. Germany had been in a privileged position at that event. As an exception to the ban on journalists, a correspondent of the Deutsche Nachrichtenbüro (German Press Agency) had been allowed to attend the conference, and the Völkische Beobachter even to include a photo in its report. Looking up these journals. Wikipedia in Germany says the Völkischer Beobachter, or VB, was the journalistic party organ of the NSDAP from December 1920 to April 1930, 1945. It translates as National Observer. In sharp contrast to bourgeois newspapers, the Völkischer Beobachter called itself a, quote, fighting paper, end quote, and was programmatically more interested in agitation than in information. Press historians have therefore called it the VB, so may have called the VB, quote, poster-like, end quote, and its style, quote, more spoken than written, end quote. Initially, the Völkischer Beobachter was published twice a week from February 8, 1923, daily by the Franz Eher Verlag in Munich. Initially the VB was published twice a week and from February 8th, 1923, daily by the Franz Eher Verlag in Munich. After its early years, it was distributed nationwide. Back to the text. This much is certain, however. The publication of Islam and Judaism opened a new chapter in the history of anti-Semitism. The lasting impression this text made on the attitude of religious elites to Jews and the state of Israel can be shown by the following example. New section, Prophecies of the Final Battle. In Islam and Judaism, the hadith of the tree and the stone was previously encountered in connection with the Hamas Charter is quoted. Quote, the hour, the resurrection, will only come when the Muslims have inflicted a crushing defeat on the Jews. When every stone and every tree behind which the Jew has hidden says to the Muslim, quote, there is a Jew hiding behind me, come and kill him, end quote, end quote. According to anti-Semitism expert Yehoshaphat Harkabi, this is a call for a, quote, eschatological, quote, final solution, end quote, end quote. Wikipedia says Yehoshaphat Harkabi lived from 1921 to 1994 and was a chief of Israeli military intelligence from 1955 until 1959, and afterwards a professor of international relations with Middle East studies at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Back to the text. The resurrection and salvation of the Muslims is made dependent on a prior massacre of Jews. Quote, such expressions cannot be said to be an essential part of Islam. They are dormant, even unknown to its adherents, and have no influence or significance, ... so long as they are not repeated with some frequency. End quote. Footnote. See Yehoshaphat Harkabi, Arab Attitudes to Israel, published in 1972. Originally published in 1967 in Hebrew. The description says, because of recent changes in the explicitly declared goals of Arabs in the Palestinian conflict, this book is of singular importance, and no scholar or expert in the Middle East affairs can afford to ignore it. This work by a scholar described as the, quote, doyen of Israeli Arabs, end quote, is the result of vast research into the attitude of the Arabs toward Israel, manifested both in their declared explicit aims and in ideological exegeses on the roots of the Palestinian problem. Approximately 120 books written by Arabs in the Arab press and radio are here and analyzed. Harkabi's searching examination is objective. His detection of consistent patterns in what at first seemed amorphous is convincing. If there is such a thing as science of political psychology, Harkabi is its master. Back to the text and footnote. It is precisely this reputation, however, that has happened. So it is precisely this repetition, however, that has happened. For long periods, this hadith was hardly ever mentioned in the mosques. Then, in August 1937, it was retrieved from oblivion and for the first time presented to a mass audience. Subsequently, and especially after the Six-Day War, it has gone on to become one of the most frequently cited hadiths of all. Particular responsibility for this development lies with an article published in October 1968 in Majalat al-Azhar, the monthly magazine of the Al-Azhar Mosque in Cairo. Wikipedia says Majalat al-Azhar is an Islamic publication of Al-Azhar University in Cairo, Egypt, which has existed since 1931. Back to the text. The monthly magazine of Al-Azhar Mosque in Cairo, one of the oldest and most prestigious Sunni universities in the world. Al-Azhar University is a public university in Cairo, Egypt, associated with Al-Azhar al-Sharif in Islamic Cairo. It is Egypt's oldest degree-granting university and is known as one of the most prestigious universities of Islamic learning. In addition to higher education, Al-Azhar oversees a national network of schools with approximately 2 million students. As of 1996, over 4,000 teaching institutes in Egypt were affiliated with the university. Founded in 970 or 972 by the Fatimid Caliphate as a center of Islamic learning, its students study the Quran and Islamic law along with logic, grammar, rhetoric, and how to calculate the phases of the moon. Today is the chief center of Arabic literature and Islamic learning in the world. In 1961, additional non-religious subjects were added to its curriculum. Its library is considered second in importance in Egypt, generally to the Egyptian National Library and Archives. In May 2005, Al-Azhar, in partnership with the Dubai Information Technology Enterprise IT Education Project, launched the H.H. Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum Project to preserve Al-Azhar scripts and publish them online, the Al-Azhar Project online, to eventually publish online access to the library's entire rare manuscripts collection, comprising about 7 million pages of material. Back to the text. Its author was the Lebanese scholar Sheikh Nadim al-Jazir, an employee of Al-Azhar's Islamic Research Academy. Under the title, The Prophecies About the Battle of Destiny Between the Muslims and Israel, Sheikh Nadim al-Jazir argued for the special importance and also, at that point in time, the great topicality of this hadith for Muslims. For 14 centuries, Sheikh Nadim al-Jazir writes, the meaning of this hadith has remained unclear. For so long as the Jews lived dispersed across the world and remained locked in their dhimmi status, it was not possible to kill them. Then, however, Allah decreed that the Jews would gain power and establish a state. This happened to enable the prophecy of the stone and the tree to be realized. Now the killing of Jews is not only possible, but also righteous. At this point, we must pause. For people who live in secularized societies, it is hard to understand how such a brutal passage can be accepted as divine revelation and taken seriously as an imperative. This is less of a problem for Orthodox Muslims. For them, religion is not part of life, but life is a part of Islam. For them, Islamic history is nothing other than the fulfillment of the goal of human history under divine guidance. That this proves the superiority of Islam, even if it involves a massacre of Jews, is not for them open to question. This is the only explanation for the fact that Muhammad Sayyid Tantawi, Sunni Islam's highest religious authority, now also stepped up to express the opinion that the destruction of Israel was preordained by God. Wikipedia says Muhammad Sayyid Tantawi lived from 1928 to 2010, also referred to as Tantawi, was an influential Islamic scholar in Egypt. From 1986 to 1996, Muhammad Sayyid Tantawi was the Grand Mufti of Egypt. In 1996, President Hosni Mubarak appointed Muhammad Sayyid Tantawi as the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, a position he retained until his death in 2010. So he was the Imam of the biggest Sunni university in the world, I guess, right? That's what was said earlier, right? Back to the text. For Tantawi, who headed Al-Azhar University from 1996 to 2010 as its Grand Imam, the main purpose of the ingathering of the Jews from exile into Israel was clear. The Jewish state had been created by the will of Allah in order to permit the prophecy expressed in the Hadith to become reality. Footnote. See the article by Shal Bartal, titled Reading the Quran, How Hamas and the Islamic Jihad Explain Surah al-Isra, published in Politics, Religion, and Ideology, 14th of December 2016. Back to the text. The Jewish Hassan Nasrallah, leader of the Shiite Hezbollah, was following the same reasoning when in 2002 he explained the advantages of the concentration of the Jews in Israel this way. Among the signs, and signals which guide us in the Islamic prophecies, is that this state, of Israel, will be established, and, that Allah, the glorified and Most High, wants to save you from having to go to the ends of the world, for they have gathered in one place, and there the final and decisive battle will take place, end quote. Jesus Christ. And Wikipedia. Yeah, I thought he was died. Hassan Nasrallah. You know what? I'm gonna look at German Wikipedia. I find that more reliable. Or you could say more in tune to my biases, but I feel like they're more likely to have the warts. Or I'll just read both. That sounds like a fair compromise. Hassan Nasrallah, who lived from 1960 to 2024, was a Lebanese Shia cleric and politician. From 1992 until his death, he was Secretary General of the Hezbollah Party, which he led in coordination with the Islamic Republic of Iran in Lebanon, a state within a state, which was classified as a terrorist organization by many countries, including Germany. Hassan Nasrallah was also the most important spiritual leader of the Lebanese Shiites. Nasrallah was killed in an Israeli airstrike on Hezbollah headquarters in a suburb of Beirut. And American or English Wikipedia says, Hassan Nasrallah lived from 1960 to 2024 and was a Lebanese cleric and politician who served as the third Secretary General of Hezbollah, a Shia Islamist political party and militia, from 1992 until his assassination in 2024. Born into a Shia family in the suburbs of Beirut in 1960, Nasrallah finished his education in Tyre. Then he briefly joined the Amal movement, and afterwards at a Shia seminary in Baalbek. He later studied and taught at an Amal school. In 1982, Nasrallah served as a founding member of Hezbollah, which was formed to fight the 1982 Israeli invasion of Lebanon, declaring that its confrontation with Israel, quote, should only end when it has been removed from existence, end quote. After a brief period of religious studies in Iran, Nasrallah returned to Lebanon and became Hezbollah's leader after his predecessor, Abbas al-Musawi, was assassinated by an Israeli airstrike in 1992. Under Nasrallah's leadership, Hezbollah acquired rockets with a longer range, which allowed them to strike at northern Israel. Israel withdrew its forces in 2000 after the 18-year occupation of southern Lebanon, a decision widely considered in Lebanon to have been due to Hezbollah's attacks. The date of Israeli withdrawals is celebrated as a public holiday in Lebanon. Hezbollah cultivated Nasrallah's media image as a charismatic authority, though his image was later weakened. Hezbollah's role in ambushing an Israeli border patrol unit leading up to the 2006 Lebanon war was subject to criticism, though Nasrallah projected the end of the war as a Lebanese and Arab victory. During the Syrian civil war, Hezbollah fought on the side of the Syrian government against what Nasrallah termed, quote, Islamist extremists, end quote. Nasrallah also promoted the, quote, axis of resistance, end quote, an informal coalition of Iran-backed groups focused on opposing Israel and the United States. eliminating Israel is what it should say. After the 2023 Hamas-led attack on Israel followed by war, Hezbollah engaged in support of Hamas in ongoing conflict that impacted both sides of the Israeli-Lebanese border. On the 27th of September 2024, Nasrallah was killed when the Israeli Air Force attacked Hezbollah's headquarters. Back to the text. This is the quote from Nasrallah. I don't know if I said this already. Quote, among the signs and signals which guide us in the Islamic prophecies is that this state bracket of Israel and bracket will be established and ... that Allah, the glorified and most high, wants to save you from having to go to the ends of the world, for they have gathered in one place ... and there the final decisive battle will take place. End quote. Turkey's President Erdogan also let himself be guided by these, quote, Islamic prophecies, end quote, in December 2017, when in a speech to the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, he threatened the Jews of Israel that when the time came they would find no, quote, tree to hide behind, end quote. This was an unmistakable allusion to the hadith about the death of even such Jews who sought to hide, at least for those who are acquainted with and know how to interpret the codes of Islamic antisemitism. Let us return to the 1930s when Islamic antisemitism was born in the context of the conflicts over Palestine. The pamphlet Islam and Judaism reached the literate elites of the Arab world. Nazi Germany, however, also wanted to arouse the Jew hatred of the, quote, Arab street, end quote. For this purpose, an Arabic short-range radio was the perfect instrument. And that's the end of the chapter. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for letting me look things up.